1/50th part of an inch, and the mean variation from a straight line is only 1/100th part of an inch. These joints were filled with a finely ground cement, using fine sand, birds' eggs, and milk. The sides of the Great Pyramid incline 10 feet horizontally for every 9 feet upward. You may be wondering what happened to the outer casing stones, estimated to have been 144,000 of them, weighing some 20 tons each. The answer is that the pyramid retained them for about 1,300 years before an earthquake dislodged some of them. To save labor working new stones, builders of later projects used the loose stones and then started to use the pyramid as a quarry. An Egyptian historian wrote that in a period of 200 years, all the casing stones had been removed. However, a few that had been hidden in the sand were found and excavated by Colonel Howard Wise, an English Egyptologist. Colonel Wise made several other notable discoveries inside the Great Pyramid, which I will cover later. Herodotus, the classic historian, tells us that it took 100,000 men working 30 years to build the Great Pyramid, 10 years preparing the site, and 20 years actual construction. Local quarries supplied the core stones, but the beautiful outer casing stones came from Tura, some distance up the Nile River. There the limestone blocks were dressed before being loaded into boats waiting at the docks on the riverbanks, from whence they were floated downriver to the construction site at Giza. The boats used in transporting the stones were probably barge-type flat-bottomed craft with a central single mast and a square sail to assist the rollers. Egyptian tomb drawings depict how the stones were transported on sledges pulled by manpower. A mixture of mud and water eased the sledge along on its rollers and up the ramps on the sides of the construction, one ramp being used to bring the empty sledges back down. Herodotus also tells us that the workmen were not slaves, but were paid wages with benefits, such as paid vacations and free rations while working, a precursor of the fringe benefits labor enjoys today. The core blocks were laid starting from the center and working out in all directions, and stopping where the casing stones were to be placed. When the pyramid reached the required height, the ramps were removed as the outer casing stones were dressed and finished, starting at the top and working down. The sloping face of each casing stone was cut to the exact angle of 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 14.3 seconds, which produced an amazing feature of the pyramid. Its vertical height bears the same relation to its base perimeter that the radius of a circle bears to its circumference. In other words, if the height of the pyramid to its base is taken as the radius of a circle, the circumference of that circle is exactly equal to the base perimeter of the pyramid. Do you realize that the builders found a method of squaring a circle without trigonometry? Just by using the pi angle, namely 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and 14.3 seconds, a fact that was to stay hidden for many centuries. Pi, the 16th letter of the Greek alphabet, is used to represent the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, which means the circumference of a circle is always 3.14159 reoccurring times greater than its diameter. On the north side of the pyramid and about 55 feet perpendicular above the base level is the original entrance, hidden for some 3,000 years by the smooth, polished casing stones. Over the entrance, 4 large blocks of limestone form a gabled apex. From this entrance, a sloping passage descends at an angle of 26 degrees approximately, passing through both the core masonry and down into the solid rock below, ending in a subterranean chamber. Hiding the entrance was a swiveled door of polished limestone, indistinguishable from the casing stones. An example of just such a door was found on an earlier pyramid at Dashur, one of the several practice pyramids prior to the Great Pyramid. Just to one side and below the hidden entrance is the so-called robber's entrance, made by Caliph al-Ma'mun of Baghdad in 820 A.D. He and his men were seeking reported treasures hidden in the interior of the pyramid. With iron tools, they tunneled in about 40 yards and were about to give up in despair of finding an opening when the dull thud of a falling stone in some hidden recess spurred them on. A few additional feet further on, they broke into the descending passage, leading down from the still hidden entrance. The fallen stone had been placed to hide the ascending passage leading up into the interior of the Great Pyramid. Elated at having found the secret interior, al-Ma'mun's men rushed down the passage, firmly believing it would lead them to the dead king's burial chamber. However, they found that it ended in a short horizontal passage which passed through a small antechamber before ending in a large, roughly hewn chamber, which was empty. No burial, no treasure. At the end of this chamber, a small dead-end passage was found, extending horizontally a short distance toward the south. And near the middle of this subterranean chamber is a square-cut vertical shaft going down about 80 feet, called the pit. Today, it is encompassed by a metal guard fence to safeguard the visitors. There has been much speculation as to the purpose of this chamber and its pit. However, the real reason is still unknown. Here we are approximately 112 feet below the level of the base of the pyramid. According to al-Ma'mun's records, the group retraced their steps back to where the stone had fallen from the ceiling, and they noticed that the stone had concealed another passage sloping upward. But it was blocked by a red granite plug, which they were unable to break up and remove, forcing them to excavate around it before they could gain access to the upward passage, which they found filled with debris, which they had to remove as they progressed upward. The plug actually turned out to be 3 separate blocks, having a total length of 15 feet, and having no tolerance between them and the walls, shows the impossibility of the plugs having been slid down into place, as some authorities have suggested. They were obviously placed in position during the construction at this height. The total length of the first ascending passage, sloping upward at an angle of a little over 26 degrees, is 1,485 pyramid inches, which is a unit of measurement used in the construction of the pyramid. This upward sloping passage ends abruptly where it opens into a high-ceilinged chamber or gallery, which in turn continues upward at the same 26-degree plus angle for a distance of about 158 feet. There are ramps on each side, and on each ramp are oblong niches, 56 in all. Their purpose is unknown. The walls of this grand gallery are formed by 7 overhanging courses of masonry, forming one of the finest examples of corbelled architecture extant. Before continuing up the grand gallery, the Arabs investigated a low horizontal passage, which started from the lower end of the gallery. This is today called the Queen's Chamber Passage. This passage then ends in the Queen's Chamber, a chamber beautifully constructed of polished limestone, the east and west walls being gabled, the apexes extending about 20 feet above the floor level. The heights of the north and south walls are about 15 feet. This chamber measures 10 royal cubits wide, 11 royal cubits in length, and its center is on the east-west axis of the pyramid. In the east wall is a corbelled niche extending 1 royal cubit, or about 3.5 feet, into the east wall. Its center is exactly 1 sacred cubit, or 25 pyramid inches, south of the chamber's center. Although the basic design of the Great Pyramid is in sacred cubits, the predominant unit of measurement in the Queen's Chamber is in Egyptian royal cubits. The difference I will explain later. It is interesting to note that the height of the niche multiplied by pi, or 3.14159, and again by 10, equals the exact height of the pyramid itself. Perhaps I should now explain the difference between the Egyptian cubit and the sacred cubit. Although the Egyptian workers used the royal cubit, they could easily convert it to the plans of the pyramid's builder's design, which was in sacred cubits, because there is a geometric relationship between them, as this chart shows. If you found that chart too difficult to understand, perhaps this formula will simplify it for you. It does? Good. Now that you fully understand the relationship, I will continue. The Arabs, thinking that the niche might be the doorway to another chamber, dug into it in a vain attempt to find Pharaoh Khufu's mummy and treasure, which has not been found to date. The Queen's Chamber has 2 air channels for ventilation, which extend to the exterior of the pyramid. The one coming from the north, or right side, strangely enough, stops short by 5 inches from entering the chamber. It was found by the insertion of a fine wire into a crack noticed in a joint. Recent sonar tests indicate a parallel passage butting into the opposite end of the Queen's Chamber, but no excavations have been made to confirm this as of 1997. A very small robot camera worked up one of the air ducts revealed a tiny stone door with metal hinges, suggesting an undiscovered chamber. This too remains for future excavations to reveal. It is noteworthy that the ceiling of the Grand Gallery increases in height over the first ascending passage exactly 286.1 pyramid inches. This is called the rectification factor, a symbolic term suggesting a correction of a symbolic displacement, an explanation of which can be found in my book, A Study in Pyramidology. This number, 286.1 pyramid inches, is a very significant number and occurs many times in the measurements found in the Great Pyramid. One example is the fact that the entire passage system, starting from the true north entrance, is 286.1 inches offset from the north-south axis of the pyramid. This is an example of the displacement factor. Another example is the designed capstone, which was rejected because it didn't fit. It was too large by 286.1 pyramid inches all around, each side projecting out 35.76 pyramid inches, a figure curiously equal to the height of the great step of the pyramid, which is a large block of limestone at the upper end of the Grand Gallery, the top of which is level with a low-ceilinged horizontal passage which continues southward, known as the King's Chamber Passage. The ramps of the Grand Gallery butt into this great step, which extends across the full width of the chamber. The face of the step is on the east-west axis of the pyramid. That is to say, it is exactly halfway through the pyramids from north to south. A side view shows the great step, 35